Will everyone please join me in Gassho as I read the words of our founder, Master Shinran Shonin. The second is deep mind. Deep mind is the deeply entrusting mind. There are two aspects. One is to believe deeply and decidedly that you are a foolish being of karmic evil, caught in birth and death, ever sinking and ever wandering in transmigration from innumerable kalpas in the past, with never a condition that would lead to emancipation. The second is to believe deeply and decidedly that Amida Buddha's 48 vows grasp sentient beings, and that allowing yourself to be carried by the power of the vow without any doubt or apprehension, you will attain birth. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, my hands feel a little bit weak. I was actually earlier this morning helping with some of the trimming of the bushes out there and doing it with the hedge clippers. And then actually Barry let me use his electronic one, so I was able to. I kind of went a little crazy. I was like zzz, and like holding it, and it was great. It was great because I was getting a good arm workout, but now I'm like, ooh, my hands are shaking, so I couldn't really put on the mic. But I would first like to thank everyone for coming out, and even though they are not inside the Hondo, to thank all the wonderful volunteers for coming out and helping to trim and make our garden look very nice, and kind of give, we all need haircuts every now and then, right? And so giving our grounds a beautiful little tidying up, as well as the wonderful BWA and the volunteers there as well for making the delicious bento. And I hope, I'd like to burn more incense so you could not be too distracted by the really delicious smelling bento. So if you had ordered bento, you of course are always in for a treat. But let's try to keep our minds on the Dharma for as long as possible, until you just give in and just run downstairs to go buy your bento. Today's Gosandai comes from Shinran Shonin's Kyogyo Shinsho, and it talks about the concept of Nishu Jinshin, or the twofold deep mind. And it seems kind of to be like two opposite ends of a coin here, right? Because first off, the first part of the sentence the first paragraph, part of the paragraph kind of feels like, gosh, I am really, really hopeless. Like there is no way I can bring myself to enlightenment on my own. And yet at the same time, on the other flip side of the coin, but Amida, because I am hopeless, Amida Buddha really Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion really assures me that I will be awakened and I will be born into the land of bliss. I will attain enlightenment. So it seems like because I'm helpless, I have all the help I need. Because I am hopeless, there is hope. And it's funny because when you think about Buddhist dichotomies, or when you think about Buddhist logic, this is very much in line with that. If you like Zen, right? If you like Zen Buddhism, there's a lot of these Buddhist dichotomies, right? Like in order to achieve something, do nothing, right? And kind of this sort of logic. But I actually like to bring this a little bit more down to earth in a sense. One of the things that I really, really enjoyed this past week was that the Ministers Association of the Northwest, that's including myself, Reverend Cindy of White River, and then we had, of course, Rinban Kusunoki of Seattle Betsuin, as well as many ministers' assistants. Oh, and of course, Reverend Jerry Hirano, who is the supervising minister to the Idaho, Oregon Buddhist Temple. We all were able to get together this past week and listen to a lecture given by the Bishop of Canada, Bishop Tatsuya Aoki. And he had told a story that I actually had forgotten about, or that I had heard about a long, long time ago, growing up at the Sacramento Betsuin. And that is the story of the Buddha and the 83 problems. Have you all heard this story before? No? Okay, this is great. Okay, I'm glad no one's heard this story yet. So, Buddha, the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, was walking along one of the roads in India, and he stops, he is stopped by a farmer who wants to talk to him about some problems that he's having. And the farmer goes to him and he says, "Oh, great Buddha, I have a problem." And he goes, "What's that?" And he goes, "My farm sometimes, right, doesn't get enough rain, so we go into the drought, and I can't grow enough crops. And then, last summer, because of this, my family and I nearly starved, right? So, Buddha, can you make it rain?" And the Buddha said to him, "I am sorry, I cannot help you with this problem." So the farmer goes, "Well, sometimes it rains too much, right? Too much of something is bad too. So then the land gets really muddy and nothing can grow, and so the same problem happens. So can you actually, when it rains too much, can you make the rain stop?" And the Buddha said, "I am sorry, I cannot help you with this problem." So now the farmer's going, "Well, okay, let me get into my personal life." And he says, "I have a wonderful, beautiful wife. But sometimes she gets on my case too much and she kind of nags me about things and it really gets on my nerves." To which the Buddha responds, "I'm sorry, I cannot help you with this problem." And then finally he says, "Well, then I have my kids, right? They're wonderful children, but sometimes they don't do what I say, they don't listen to me, or they rebel against me, or they talk back to me, or they don't sit still, they don't do all these things, right? Sometimes the Buddha, I get so frustrated with my children. What can I do?" And the Buddha looks at the man again and he says, "I'm sorry, I cannot help you with this problem." So finally, the man just goes and he starts to list off all of these other problems that he has, right? All these other problems, everyday life problems, probably problems that you and I share. To each time, the Buddha responds to him, "I'm very sorry, I cannot help you with this problem." And finally, the farmer gets fed up, right? And he said, he says, you're the Buddha. He goes, I thought you were like this great, wise, and awakened leader and spiritual teacher, and all you have done so far is tell me that you can't help me with my problems, And finally, he says, "Well, if you can't do any of these things, what can you do? What are you able to do for me?" And the Buddha said to him, the Buddha says that, "I cannot help anybody with the 83 problems, because everybody has 83 problems. Everybody has these 83 problems, right?" And sometimes this is a very dissatisfying answer, right? This is a very dissatisfying answer. When we come to our friends to complain, or we share our grievances with somebody, and their response to us is, "Everybody has problems," right? What a dissatisfying answer, right? So the farmer says, "Well, what can you do?" And the Buddha says, "I can help you with your 84th problem." And the farmer responds to him, "Wait, 84th? You just said I had 83. How could, it's like, what? I need more problems, than this 84th, than the 83 problems? You have to add another one? So what is my 84th problem?" And the Buddha says that you want to get rid of your 83 problems. That you see your 83 problems as problems. I can help you get rid of the 84th problem, which is that problem. So this actually, I was thinking about this story for quite a while after Bishop Aoki shared this with us. I was thinking to myself, well, how can we turn this into a Jodo Shinshu story? For those of you who are newer to the temple, Jodo Shinshu is also one of those weird, I don't want to say weird because I love our tradition, but it also has those dichotomy-like practices, right? When people ask us what our practice is, oftentimes they're thinking, oh, we sit, as Buddhists, we sit in Zazen meditation for this amount of minutes. We use our mala beads to count this many meditations, right? Buddhism is often associated with doing all of these techniques, right? All of these ritualistic practices that, kind of bring us to this spiritual moment of clarity. And yet, what's interesting is that Jodo Shinshu, or our tradition of Pure Land Buddhism, is often called or often referred to as the practice of no practice. But if we have to say we do anything, right, we place our hands together and we say Namo Amida Butsu, which roughly translates to, I take refuge in the Buddha of infinite light and infinite life. And as we say in our tradition, this is all you need, which might seem kind of suspect. Wait a minute, you're saying all I have to do is place my hands together and say Namo Amida Butsu, I don't need anything else. In this tradition, we say you don't need anything else. This is why this tradition was so popular with the common people of Japan, even the people who were considered to be outcasts of Japan. Yes, ancient Japan had a caste system that considered certain people lower than people, right? People who dealt with animal skins, people who dealt with sewage and all those other things. They were considered to be kind of non-humans and were almost like they use the words like untouchables, right? But Shinran preached to these people too and said, the Buddha's compassion is just as much for you as it is for a monk like myself, okay? And in this way, we think about the quote that we said this morning. When we come to the temple, right, or when someone comes to the Buddhist school, we sort of have this notion that there's something wrong with me, or I want a spiritual path that will make my life better. Right? We have this idea that I am this flawed human being, and if I go to the temple and I do the practices, or I do all of these ritualistic spiritual practices, I will become a better person, or I will become enlightened, or I will get this, right? But when we think about that type of thinking, that is actually flawed thinking, in a sense, especially in Mahayana Buddhism. In Mahayana Buddhism, ultimately, we're saying, actually, you are who you are, and that's all you need to be. And the real challenge is being okay with that. The real challenge is accepting that, right? And this isn't to say that self-improvement is not a good thing, right? We should all deeply look at our actions and, are our actions harmful? When we are, when I get so quick to get mad about things, is that helpful, right? Of course, we have to think about these things. But ultimately, right, me putting my hand, Namo Amida Butsu, is not going to make me this happy-go-lucky person all of a sudden, or just cure me of my kleshas, or hang-ups, or afflictions that keep me from being enlightened. But in that regard, right, this is why I say Namo Amida Butsu. And this is why Amida Buddha helps me to realize that I am also embraced by this Dharma action, by this wisdom and compassion. I myself as a human being am flawed, right? I think most religion teaches this. Most religious schools teach that all of us human beings are flawed in some way or another. But in this regard, right, Jodo Shinshu kind of teaches us that, flaws aren't considered, are not necessarily considered to be these damning things that we have to get rid of. We definitely have to do our best to manage these things, manage these aspects about us. And yet, at the same time, because we are embraced by Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion, we don't need to focus on getting rid of these flaws from our body, right? Getting rid of these flaws from ourselves necessarily. This isn't this is not a golden ticket. This is not a thing where I say, go out and live your life and, a life of hedonism and do whatever you want and drink however much you want, go gamble, right? Do all these things, right? I'm not saying that. But Jodo Shinshu teaches us that we are accepted by the Dharma, by Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion, as we are. When we think about, the story of the farmer and the Buddha, right? The farmer was trying to get the Buddha to tell him, all these techniques or some spiritual teaching that will make his life better, right? Will make my life, make my life better, make the rain stop. make my kids better behaved, make my wife not nag me as much, right? But the Buddha actually says, your real problem in all of this is thinking that, you have to get rid of these things in order to live a fulfilling and meaningful life. The same thing is, I think, true with Jodo Shinshu, right? And this is where I think a lot of us sort of get tangled up when we come to temples sometimes, is that it's like, okay, I want to be changed for the better. I want to, receive some, real deep spiritual meaning from the Buddha. And yet all it takes is Namo Amida Butsu. That in itself is the gift. Namo Amida Butsu, the fact that the Buddha embraces us as we are. It's interesting because it's hard for us to accept this sometimes, really. Even in Shinran Shonin's time, our founder, there's a story of many of his followers coming to him and saying, you're telling us that, Nembutsu is like the only thing that we need, right? But isn't there some secret technique that you can teach us or some secret teaching that you're not telling us? To which Shinran responds, no. And there's actually a famous saying that he says, you have come all this way because these people were coming from across the country of Japan to come listen to Shinran Shonin speak. And he says, but if you have come to listen to something other than me telling you that the Nembutsu is all you need, you're going to be sadly mistaken. So for a lot of these folks, right, this, it's hard for us to accept or just fully grasp this concept of Namo Amida Butsu being all that we need. But then in that case, this is where I think Jodo Shinshu provides us with this spiritual teaching that we have to wrestle with all the time, right? Because our egos are so strong, or we want to build our spiritual credibility, or because we want to make ourselves, at least feel better about ourselves, or think to ourselves that we're being way more spiritual in our lives, we think that there's something more. But in actuality, Jodo Shinshu tries to tell us that the Nembutsu, or the working of other power or Dharma power, is actually coming towards us. And all we need to do is gratefully receive that. Can be sometimes a hard message to digest. But when you think about your daily lives, think about your daily lives now, especially in the modern age that we live. Yes, it's true. There's a lot of things that we don't have to do as much work on. We don't have to go to the library so much anymore. We can just look things up on the internet. Whether or not it's credible can be kind of a shaky story. We don't. There are other things. There's these delivery services for food now that we can utilize. Our banking system has become incredibly easy. I'm depending on who's in the audience, of course. But if there were a bunch of college students in the audience, I would have asked them, hey, how many of you know how to write a check, right? But it's like now you just have to beep your card and that's it. But even in the modern age that we live in now, think of how busy you are. Think of when the pandemic was over and you had to get back to work, or you had to get back to going into the office, and the demands that are thrust upon the working force now these days. Think about that. Right? All of these, especially since things are so fast now, our expectations are even higher. Our patience is even lower. If something even for me, I feel this as well. Like if I'm watching something on Hulu and all of a sudden the loading sign comes up and I'm not getting my content right away, I start to get irritated. Like, what the heck is the problem with the internet? Right? As if I know how the internet works, or I know how these things are supposed to work. Oh no, my cable is disrupted. This makes me mad. But so all of these, and then of course I put it upon the workers who have to go out there and fix the cables. Get here faster. Do it by today. Do it by yesterday. Right? All of these are things that I think are growing worse and worse within us. So with this in mind, I think for the average person, right, are you really thinking about all the Buddhist practices that you have to do? Are you thinking about all of the retreats that you're going to go on? Probably not. And this is why Jodo Shinshu was so popular with the farmers and the merchants and everybody who was considered to be average or normal in Japan. Notice I put average and normal in quotation marks there. But they didn't have time to go on these spiritual retreats and spend days upon days, meditating. And if you can go on these retreats, more power to you. But that doesn't mean, again, this is where I'm going to say this publicly, right? Going on these spiritual retreats doesn't make you better than the average Nembutsu follower who only has time to come into the temple and say Amida Butsu, right? This is, I just want to put that out there, that, doing countless upon countless of hours of meditation doesn't make you way more enlightened than the Nembutsu follower. And I actually believe that my Zen friends would agree with me when I say this, that if you're logging the amount of time that you're sitting Zazen, right, that if you're logging the amount of hours that you're putting into sitting Zazen, you're kind of missing the point. In the same regard with our school of Buddhism, if you're logging the amount of times you're saying Namo Amida Butsu, okay, I said Namo Amida Butsu 80 times today, right? I should be further along. You're kind of missing the point, right? You're saying Namo Amida Butsu because we feel this immense sense of gratitude and acceptance of this other power of the Dharma working for our benefit, working for us, right? We come to this temple with a deep sense of gratitude because we know that the Dharma working continues to work for us ceaselessly. This is what is taught. This is the working of Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. We are so far from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha that, we can, for me especially, I am so grateful that the Nembutsu exists. I am so grateful for the 3 Pure Land Sutras that teaches us this. Because again, even as a Jodo Shinchu priest, right, I still have to live my life in and amongst society. I still have to pay taxes. I still have to go to the grocery store. I still have to feed my cat. I still have to, take care of myself when I'm sick. I have a lot of things I have to do. I have to, do almost everything that the average person has to do in their daily lives. I do not get to be up on a mountaintop like, like the monks who are up in those monasteries on the mountain. I am here with all of you as well, which is why I am grateful that the Nembutsu teaching is here for me. With this in mind, I would like all of you to enjoy the fact that June 1st is here. We are in, kind of in the first, season of summer, I think, which is actually why I'm wearing these robes today. Today is June 1st, so I transfer from the solid robes to the mesh ones here, which is the style in Japan. And realize that regardless of the season, regardless of the day, regardless of the time of, regardless of what month it is, the Nembutsu is working for your benefit and mine. Please join me in Gassho. Deep mind is the deeply entrusting mind. There are 2 aspects. One is to believe deeply and decidedly that you are a foolish being of karmic evil, caught in birth and death, ever sinking and ever wandering in transmigration from innumerable kalpas in the ever wandering, in the past, with never a condition that would lead to emancipation. The second is to believe deeply and decidedly that Amida Buddha's 48 vows grasp sentient beings, and that allowing yourself to be carried by the power of the vow without any doubt or apprehension, you will attain birth. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Nam mandat, nam mandat.